What if a single act of kindness could change everything? It's easy to dismiss the importance of small gestures in the grand scheme of life. A smile shared, a door held open, an extra coin offered to someone who's hungry. These are actions that many of us perform without giving them much thought. After all, kindness is often seen as a simple, unremarkable thing. But, as history has taught us time and time again, the most profound changes often stem from moments that seem insignificant at the time. Imagine, for a moment, a poor stranger, a person who has nothing left to give except the hunger gnawing at their stomach. They are wandering the streets, isolated, hungry, and desperate for any sign of human decency. They are far from the warm homes, the grand estates, the lavishness of wealth that the powerful and influential experience daily. For them, the world is a harsh place where survival, not compassion, is the goal. But then, something unexpected happens. In an act that seems so simple, so inconspicuous, this stranger finds themselves the recipient of something extraordinary: kindness. Not just any kindness, but the kind that doesn't ask for anything in return. The kind that gives when there is little to spare. The kind that comes from someone who could, by all accounts, afford to ignore them, yet chooses not to. This act, the sharing of the last scraps of food, the extending of a hand to someone in need, has the power to reshape not just the day of this stranger, but, in a twist of fate, the lives of an entire family, the course of a dynasty, and the reputation of a man whose name is known by all. This is the story of how one poor stranger, hungry and without hope, unknowingly altered the life of a powerful duke's family forever. Kindness, as simple as it may seem, holds an extraordinary power that most fail to comprehend. We live in a world where power, wealth, and influence reign supreme, where the rich and the powerful are often seen as those who shape the world around them. They are the ones whose actions seem to have the most weight, whose decisions ripple through society like waves crashing onto the shore. Yet, in the midst of all this power, kindness remains one of the few things that can truly break through the walls built by privilege and status. It's not bound by rank, and it doesn't wait for permission. Kindness doesn't ask for a reward, nor does it require an invitation. It simply exists. The story we are about to embark on is a testament to that very power. The quiet, yet forceful, ripple of a single act of kindness. It's a tale where a humble, poor stranger is not only fed, but, in a way, is given something far more significant than food. They are given the opportunity to change the course of their own life, and the life of someone far beyond their reach. At first glance, this act of kindness seems insignificant. After all, in a world where the rich and powerful seem to get everything they want, what does the offering of a meal to a poor stranger really matter? Yet, as we'll see, it matters more than anything else in the world. The woman at the heart of this story is not a typical character. She is not a saint, nor is she someone who could easily be categorized as either good or bad. No, the Duke's mother is something more complex. A woman who walks the fine line between power and kindness, between ruling with an iron fist and nurturing with a soft hand. She's a woman of status, born into a family of great wealth, living in a mansion that towers over the town like a fortress. Her husband, the Duke, commands armies and leads men. Their wealth flows through the veins of the kingdom, reaching every corner, every household, every marketplace. They are the heart of the region, a family whose influence is so pervasive that even a whisper from the Duke could change the fate of a nation. Yet, despite all of this, the Duke's mother, while never forgetting the importance of family duty, has always carried a quiet and deep-rooted compassion for those who have less. It's something that sets her apart from the cold, calculating world in which she resides. Her kindness is not something she wears on her sleeve. It is a quiet, almost invisible thing. It doesn't scream for attention or demand admiration. Instead, it shows itself in small, unannounced gestures. A meal shared with a servant, a few coins slipped into the hands of a beggar, a moment of genuine empathy extended to those who are usually ignored. While the world around her worships power and wealth, the Duke's mother knows that true strength lies in a different realm, in the ability to remain human in a world that often forgets the value of humanity. She understands that, in a world driven by money and status, kindness is the rarest and most valuable thing of all. One evening, as winter winds howled through the streets and the cold clung to every corner of the town, a poor stranger found himself outside the gates of the Duke's family estate. Hungry, cold, and desperate, he had wandered for days without a true destination. His body was thin, his clothes ragged, and his spirit nearly broken. He had been told that food and warmth could be found at the Duke's estate, stories told by other beggars who had caught glimpses of the grand dinners held inside those walls, of the luxury and abundance that seemed to define the lives of those who lived there. He had heard of the magnificent feasts where the rich dined on delicacies from every corner of the world. But he didn't ask for much. A scrap of bread, a drink of water, a brief respite from the cold, that was all he hoped for. And it was there, outside the estate, that fate intervened. The Duke's mother, walking alone that evening, happened upon the stranger. She was returning from a quiet errand, her mind preoccupied with the matters of her household, when she noticed him. His hunched shoulders, his empty eyes, the thinness of his frame that spoke volumes more than any words could. She could have easily ignored him, dismissed him as just another beggar who would be gone by morning. But something in her heart stirred, something that told her this was no ordinary encounter. Without a second thought, she beckoned him forward, inviting him to sit with her by the small hearth she had arranged for herself that evening. She shared the only food she had left, the last piece of bread, the remnants of a meal she had meant to enjoy alone. It wasn't much, but it was all she had. In that moment, she saw more than just a hungry man. She saw a fellow human being, a person deserving of care, of kindness, of a moment of warmth. She shared her food without hesitation, without the expectation of anything in return. And when the stranger looked up at her with gratitude shining in his eyes, something shifted inside her. That simple act, the giving of what little she had, would resonate far beyond that moment. What neither the stranger nor the Duke's mother knew that evening was that this one seemingly insignificant moment would be the catalyst for a series of events that would forever alter the lives of those involved. The stranger's life would change in ways he could never have imagined. And for the Duke's mother, that act of kindness would linger in her heart, shaping the way she would view the world and the people around her. In a world obsessed with power and wealth, it's easy to forget that sometimes the smallest act of kindness can have the greatest impact. This story is a reminder that even the most humble of gestures can alter the course of history, change lives, and influence generations to come. The ripple effect of that moment of compassion would extend far beyond that cold winter night. It would change the stranger's fate, the Duke's mother's legacy, and ultimately the course of the entire Duke's family. All because one woman decided, in the face of everything the world expected of her, to offer a stranger her only food. If you, like this and still want to be listening to such interesting royal stories on the channel, dark royal stories, don't forget to like, share, comment, and most immediately subscribe to my channel, and click the bell for more update. In a world where power, wealth, and influence carve the paths of history, there are few who dare to live outside of those expectations. Those who sit at the top of society are the ones whose names are known far and wide, whose voices command rooms, whose decisions alter the fate of nations. But even in this world of grandeur and power, there exist moments of quiet defiance, acts that challenge the very foundations upon which the structure of wealth and influence is built. This is a story of one such moment, but before it unfolds, let us step into the world of the Duke's family. A world of opulence and wealth, of power and influence, where the line between what is considered right and wrong is often blurred by status and ambition. It is within this world that the Duke's mother stands, quietly at the edges, but undeniably present in her strength and grace. The Duke's mother was a woman who had seen the rise and fall of many great houses, watched fortunes grow, and witnessed lives change with a single stroke of a pen. She had lived through the wars, the politics, and the endless games of power that dominated the court. Her name was well known in the kingdom, not just for her wealth and influence, but for the legacy she had built within the grand halls of her estate. Her family's wealth was immense, passed down through generations, accumulated through astute investments, political marriages, and business dealings that spanned continents. The estate in which she lived was a monument to that wealth, a sprawling complex with towering stone walls, manicured gardens that seemed to stretch forever, and countless rooms filled with priceless artifacts, gold-leafed mirrors, and tapestries that told the stories of the family's ancestors. Every inch of the estate screamed affluence, from the grand staircase that curved upwards like the backbone of a giant, to the crystal chandeliers that glistened above like drops of dew. But despite the magnitude of her wealth, the Duke's mother was not defined by her riches. She was not a woman who sought to bask in the luxury that surrounded her. Rather, she moved through her world with quiet dignity, never raising her voice, never demanding attention, and yet commanding respect in the subtlest of ways. The halls of the estate, while magnificent, could be suffocating, filled with the whispers of power and the weight of unspoken expectations. The Duke's mother had long ago learned to navigate them with a grace that few could match. She was a woman whose reputation was forged not by public spectacles, but by small, seemingly insignificant acts. She was a woman who, despite her immense power, retained an inner softness, a compassion that she kept hidden from the world around her. Those who worked within the estate knew this about her, but few ever dared to speak of it. She never boasted of her kindness, never called attention to her charitable deeds. Instead, she simply lived by a code of empathy that few could understand, a code that guided her actions behind closed doors and in quiet moments when the world was not watching. Her compassion was not for show. It was not a political move or a calculated gesture to earn favor. It was simply who she was. And while many viewed her as a powerful matriarch, a leader of men and women, her heart was something far more humble. She gave when there was little to spare. She offered kindness to those who had nothing, and she never once asked for anything in return. It was this compassion that would one day lead her to change the course of the stranger's life forever, and, in turn, the future of her family. While the Duke's family lived in the grandest of estates, the stranger's life was one defined by hardship and struggle. He was a man of no name, no title, no wealth. His existence was a stark contrast to the opulence of the Duke's household. His clothes, ragged and worn, hung loosely from his thin frame, tattered by days, perhaps weeks of wandering. His face was gaunt, his skin pale from lack of proper nourishment, his eyes hollow, and filled with the quiet desperation of someone who had lost everything. The stranger had once known better times. Perhaps in another life, he had been someone of importance, someone with a home, with food to eat and a warm bed to sleep in. But that life was long gone, washed away by the cruel forces of fate that had left him broken and alone. Now, he was nothing more than a shadow of a man, wandering the streets in search of a glimmer of hope, a fleeting moment of kindness that could restore his belief in the world. He had no destination, no plan. He was simply moving, as though carried by some invisible force that propelled him forward, even when his body screamed for rest. Every step he took felt heavier than the last, and every moment that passed was a reminder that he was running out of time. Hunger gnawed at him constantly. It wasn't just the hunger for food. It was a deeper, more visceral hunger, the kind that fills the soul with longing and desperation. He didn't know where his next meal would come from, or if it would come at all. And yet, he carried on, as so many who find themselves in desperate situations do. Hopping that somehow, someone would offer a moment of mercy. It was not that he was incapable of survival. He had survived far worse before, but the weight of his circumstances was beginning to break him. He was not used to this kind of existence, to the daily humiliation of begging for scraps, to the looks of disdain that others cast upon him as he passed by. He could feel their judgment, their eyes sliding over him as though he were invisible, as though he didn't matter at all. But the truth was that he did matter. He was human, he was alive, and he deserved kindness just as much as anyone else. But no one seemed to notice him, not until that one fateful evening when the Duke's mother, moving quietly through the streets, would offer him a kindness that would change everything. The world the Duke's family inhabited was a world of contrasts. On the outside, it gleamed with luxury and wealth, a world that few could ever hope to enter. Inside the grand estate, the walls were adorned with priceless art, the floors made of marble so polished that they gleamed like glass. Servants bustled about, tending to every need, ensuring that no demand went unmet. Everything was taken care of. Everything had its place. But behind the surface of wealth, there was a deeper, darker undercurrent of pressure. The Duke's family was constantly under scrutiny. Everyone watched them, everyone judged them. They had to be perfect. There was no room for mistakes. The Duke's mother, in particular, felt the weight of these expectations every single day. As a woman of power, she could never afford to be seen as weak, as vulnerable. Kindness was something that had to be kept hidden, something that could be used against her if it were ever discovered. Yet, in the quiet corners of her world, kindness was still alive. It lived in her heart, in the small moments when she could act without fear of judgment. The estate, for all its grandeur, was not a fortress of coldness and indifference. The warmth of her compassion seeped through the cracks of its walls, reaching the hidden corners where the world could not see. This is where the story begins. The contrast between the wealth and power of the Duke's family and the despair of the stranger forms the backdrop of this story. A story where a single, selfless act of kindness will forever alter the lives of all involved. It was in this world, so full of power and influence, that a moment of pure, uncalculated kindness would create ripples that would not only change the course of the stranger's life, but also the future of the family who had everything but compassion for those less fortunate. It was a cold evening. The wind howled outside, sending gusts of snow flurries through the narrow, winding streets of the town. The world around the estate seemed to be slipping into the quiet solitude of winter's embrace. The fires inside the Duke's grand home burned brightly, their warm, flickering light casting long shadows across the marble floors. The estate, though bustling with the movement of servants and attendants, had an air of stillness to it, as if even the very walls held their breath in anticipation of the night ahead. For the Duke's mother, however, the quiet was anything but peaceful. As she moved through the halls, her thoughts were tangled with the weight of the decisions she had made and the responsibilities she carried. There was always something more to do, always someone's needs to meet, always something to manage or oversee. And in a life governed by such relentless demands, there was little room left for herself, for moments of genuine respite or human connection. She had long ago learned to suppress her own desires and needs in favor of those around her. After all, she was the matriarch of a powerful family, one of the most influential women in the kingdom, and her place in the world was that of a leader, not a nurturer. But tonight, something felt different. The night air was biting as the Duke's mother stepped outside, stepping away from the warmth and security of her estate to take a brief walk through the garden. The world outside the estate was so different, untamed, raw, and starkly real. There, the harshness of the world was palpable. The people who walked these streets, unlike those in the grand halls of her estate, did not have the luxury of warmth, safety, or an abundance of food. She had always tried to keep herself distanced from the streets outside her walls. After all, she had a duty to her family, to her name, and to the power they wielded. It wasn't that she lacked compassion. No, she knew she was more compassionate than most. But compassion in her world was something to be given sparingly. It was a currency that could be used against her if she wasn't careful. Her generosity was often measured, controlled. It had to be. Vulnerability had no place in the life of a woman who had everything. Yet, tonight, something tugged at her heart. The sight of the town, its humble houses, the shadows cast across the snow-covered streets, the families huddled together inside their modest homes, reminded her of something she had long forgotten. She had been born into a different world, one of struggle, one that required grit and resilience. And then she saw him. The man stood just at the edge of the garden, his figure hunched and drawn as if weighed down by something far heavier than just the cold night air. His clothes were worn, his shoes tattered, and his face was gaunt, hollowed out by hunger. His eyes, though dull from exhaustion, were sharp and alert, darting from side to side as though the world was something he could never quite trust. The stranger was a man of no importance to the world, at least, not in the sense that most people measured worth. He was a man without status, without wealth, and perhaps without hope. His hair, tangled and matted, clung to his forehead as the cold wind tugged at him, but it wasn't the cold that truly consumed him. It was the hunger, the deep gnawing emptiness inside him that he could never escape. For a moment, the Duke's mother simply watched him. His presence was not imposing. He was not a threat, but something in his vulnerability struck her, something so raw and real that it cut through the layers of carefully constructed walls she had built around her own heart. She saw herself in him, in his desperation and his quiet humility. His eyes locked onto hers for a fleeting moment, and it was then that she saw it, the same silent plea that she had once carried in her own heart when she was young, struggling to survive in a world that had little use for kindness. But she was no longer that young girl. She was a woman of power, a woman who had long since learned to protect herself, to shield herself from the harsh realities of the world. And yet in that moment, as she looked at the stranger, she felt something stir inside her, a reminder of a part of herself that she had long buried. Are you hungry? Her voice, though soft, seemed to cut through the chill of the evening. The man's gaze flickered, his eyes darting from her face to the food in her hand. A simple loaf of bread, wrapped in cloth, the last bit of sustenance she had for herself this evening. He hesitated, his pride battling with the crushing weight of hunger. I could use something, he finally muttered, his voice hoarse. His words were tinged with a vulnerability that, though unspoken, echoed in the air between them. The Duke's mother studied him for a moment, her thoughts racing. She had been trained to make decisions with logic, with careful deliberation. Generosity was not a decision to be made lightly, especially not for someone in her position. To offer anything to this man, to give him her food, would be a risk. What if he were to speak of this encounter? What if he told others? Word could spread that the Duchess had shared her provisions with a common beggar. Her reputation, her family's reputation, could suffer. At that moment, the world seemed to shrink. The walls of the grand estate, the weight of power, the expectations of the title she carried, all of it felt distant, irrelevant. What mattered now, in this instant, was the simple, undeniable truth that this man needed help. He was hungry, he was cold, and no one else had come to his aid. She could help him, even if just for a moment. The Duke's mother stepped forward, the decision already made. She offered him the bread, her voice steady but warm. "Take it," she said, her hand extending the humble gift. The stranger's eyes widened in disbelief. He glanced at the bread, then back at her, as if expecting some trick, some ulterior motive. His mind raced, confused by the gesture. Why would she, this woman of wealth and power, offer food to someone like me, asterisk, but as his gaze met hers again, he saw no judgment, no contempt. There was only a quiet, unspoken kindness in her eyes, a genuine compassion that seemed to flow from her without effort. And in that moment, the wall of doubt he had built around himself began to crumble. He took the bread with trembling hands, his throat tight. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice breaking. He didn't know what else to say. He was used to rejection, to being ignored, to being invisible. Kindness, real kindness, was a rare thing in his world. As the stranger stepped back, still clutching the bread, his eyes filled with something far deeper than gratitude, asterisk shock. The shock of receiving kindness without conditions, the shock of being seen in a world that had long ignored him. His hands trembled not from the cold, but from the overwhelming feeling of being cared for. Even if just for a moment. He couldn't remember the last time someone had looked at him with such sincerity. He began to speak, his voice wavering, but the words caught in his throat. He didn't know how to express what he felt, not just for the bread, but for the kindness, for the simple acknowledgement of his existence. "You don't know what this means to me," he began, but the words faded as his chest tightened. What could he say to someone who had done so much for him, when he had so little to offer in return? The Duke's mother merely nodded, her expression calm, almost serene. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Her actions had already conveyed more than words ever could. In that moment, she had given him something that would outlast the bread in his hands, dignity. She had given him the simple acknowledgement of his humanity, of his worth, when the world had refused to do so. As the stranger turned to leave, the Duke's mother watched him for a moment longer. She could feel a strange warmth in her chest, a softening that she hadn't known she needed. She had no idea what the future held for the stranger. She didn't know if he would be able to make it through the winter, or if this would be the last time their paths ever crossed. But in that moment, she knew one thing for certain. He would never forget her kindness, and neither would she. Asterisk with one last, lingering glance, the stranger disappeared into the shadows, his figure slowly swallowed by the night. The Duke's mother stood alone, the cold air now brushing against her face, but it no longer felt biting. For the first time in a long while, she felt a sense of peace settle over her, peace in knowing that, in some small way, she had made a difference. This moment, so simple and unremarkable to the eyes of the world, would be the turning point. For the stranger, it was the start of a new life, a new chance at survival. For the Duke's mother, it was a reminder that kindness, no matter how small, could change everything. In this brief encounter, the two had found something that would transcend the boundaries of wealth, power, and status. Something that would change not only the course of their lives, but would ripple through the lives of those connected to them in ways neither could yet imagine. And as the snow continued to fall around her, the Duke's mother remained where she was, looking out into the night, a quiet smile tugging at the corners of her lips, knowing that the world had shifted ever so slightly because of one simple act of kindness. The days that followed the quiet moment she had shared with the stranger passed in the usual flow of obligations. The grand estate continued its hum of activity, servants bustling about, letters arriving for the Duke, business matters to attend to, all the endless demands of a family that held the reins of a kingdom's fate. But for the Duke's mother, something had changed, something that could not be undone. That evening, when she had given the last of her bread to a stranger, she had done so without thinking of the consequences. In the moment, it was just a simple act of kindness, a gesture that felt right in the depths of her being. But as the hours passed, as the days unfolded, she found herself reflecting on what had transpired. The stranger had come and gone, but the moment lingered in her heart, gnawing at her thoughts, shaping them in ways she hadn't expected. She had always known kindness was a virtue, something she had been taught from an early age, yet it was a virtue that she had kept locked away, hidden behind the walls of wealth, power, and influence. She had used her position to help others, donating to charities, attending to the poor, but it had always been from a distance. Kindness had always been something she could control, something she could offer in measured doses, something that didn't cost her too much. After all, generosity had its place in the court, but it could not overshadow the power she wielded. But now, she realized how much of herself she had been holding back, how much of her true nature had been stifled in favor of maintaining control, of upholding the image of a woman who could do anything except be vulnerable. In the quiet space of her reflection, she realized that her compassion was not a weakness, it was a strength. A strength that had been buried under layers of expectation, of duty, of the world telling her that power and wealth were the only measures of success. That simple act of feeding a stranger, of seeing him as a person and not just another beggar, had opened her eyes to something she had known but never fully acknowledged. Kindness was more valuable than wealth. Power, influence, and control could be fleeting, easily taken from her in the blink of an eye. But kindness was something that no one could ever take away. Kindness was lasting. The realization settled in her heart with a profound weight. She had long believed that love, loyalty, and compassion were things to be protected, things to be guarded carefully, but now she saw that they were gifts. She could share them freely, without fear, without reservation. And in doing so, she would find a deeper, more lasting strength, one that could not be shaken by the capricious winds of power or fortune. From that moment on, the way she viewed the world around her began to shift. No longer would she be driven solely by the expectations of others. She began to embrace the idea that it wasn't about how much wealth or power she had, but rather how she used it. And it wasn't about how many people bowed before her, but how many lives she could touch with the genuine compassion that now burned within her. As the years passed, the Duke's mother's transformation became more apparent, even to those who had known her all her life. Her softening heart did not make her any less formidable in her role as matriarch of the family. If anything, it made her more powerful in ways no one could predict. The power she wielded now came from something deeper, her ability to inspire loyalty, respect, and genuine affection. She became a figure whose kindness was not seen as weakness, but as a unique strength that only enhanced her authority. But for her son, the Duke, the change was more subtle. As he grew into the role of head of the family, taking the reins of the estate and the responsibilities that came with it, he watched his mother with an ever-growing sense of admiration and confusion. The Duke had inherited much from his mother, not just the wealth and the name, but her legacy. He had always known of her kindness, of course, but it was something he had never truly understood. He had been taught that power was the ultimate goal. As a child, he had seen her make decisions with wisdom and strength, and as he matured, he had adopted those same traits. He had been groomed for leadership, molded to be the protector of his family, to be the one who made the hard decisions. But as he watched her more closely, especially after that evening with the stranger, he began to see things differently. The cold, calculated decisions that had always been his way seemed, to him, lacking in comparison to his mother's quiet strength. She didn't need to raise her voice to be heard. She didn't need to demand loyalty. She earned it with her empathy, her understanding, and her willingness to give without expecting anything in return. He couldn't help but feel a sense of conflict within himself. He admired his mother's compassion, but he was also wary of it. The world he inhabited was one where power was everything, and weakness, kindness in his mind, was something that could be exploited. His father had taught him that the only way to survive in such a world was to keep emotions in check, to stay one step ahead of everyone else. Power, not compassion, was the key to success. But as the years went by, the Duke began to notice something in his mother's legacy that troubled him. It was clear that people respected him because of his position, his title, his authority. But his mother, despite her advanced years and the quiet nature of her strength, commanded something far deeper. People did not just respect her, they loved her. The loyalty she commanded was not born out of fear, but out of genuine affection, respect, and admiration. And slowly, the Duke began to wonder, could he have that same kind of respect without sacrificing who he truly was? Could he lead not just with power, but with compassion? He found himself struggling with this question more often than he liked to admit. As he became more entrenched in the politics of ruling, he had to make choices, some of them difficult and harsh. Yet, every time he made a decision that lacked compassion, he couldn't help but hear his mother's voice in his mind, asking him if it was truly the right choice. Her quiet strength became a constant, gentle reminder that power could be wielded with kindness, and it was this balance that he struggled to understand. In the silence of his study, with the weight of his responsibilities pressing down on him, the Duke found himself increasingly turning to his mother for advice, seeking her counsel on matters that, on the surface, seemed unrelated to compassion. He would ask for her insight on political matters, on family alliances, and on the people they served. And in every instance, her advice was the same. Lead with compassion, for it is the most powerful weapon in the world. Asterisk for the stranger. That moment of kindness had altered the very course of his life. The bread, the warmth, the simple yet profound gesture of being seen and cared for had become a memory that he carried with him always. After that night, the stranger did not simply fade into obscurity. His life took a turn for the better, though not immediately in ways anyone could have predicted. The small act of kindness had restored something inside him, something he had lost long ago. His faith in humanity had been reignited, and with it, a newfound strength. For the first time in years, the stranger felt that he had a place in the world. The bread he had been given, though it was only a meal, became a symbol of something far more significant: hope. He no longer saw himself as a mere beggar, someone without value or purpose. He saw himself as someone deserving of dignity. He remembered the kindness of the Duke's mother every day. It became a part of him, a part that whispered to him in moments of despair, telling him to keep moving, to keep believing. Over time, the stranger found work. It wasn't glamorous work, but it was honest, and it allowed him to rebuild his life piece by piece. And though his journey was still long, it was one he walked with the knowledge that kindness could change everything. He never forgot the Duke's mother, the woman who had fed him when he was at his lowest, who had given him more than just bread that night. She had given him a reason to live again. Years later, when he had become a successful merchant, helping to feed others as he had once been fed, he often thought back to that winter evening. He knew that his rise from the depths of poverty had been shaped by that single act. And in his own small way, he made sure to pass it on, offering help to those who had no hope, just as he had once been helped. The legacy of that one small act of kindness, the bread given freely by a woman of power to a stranger in need, was not just a fleeting moment. It was a moment that set in motion a series of events that would alter the lives of all involved. The Duke's mother had given much more than food. She had given hope. And in return, that hope had transformed her life, the stranger's life, and ultimately her son's life as well. It was a gift that could never be repaid, but one that would echo through the generations to come, carried on in the hearts of those who had been touched by it. The Duke, now more than ever, understood that kindness was not just a simple act. It was a legacy, a powerful force that could change the world. And with that knowledge, he began to lead in a way that honored his mother's quiet strength, shaping his family's future in ways that extended far beyond wealth and power. And the stranger. He went on to live a life full of meaning, forever carrying the memory of that simple, selfless act, the moment when a woman of power chose kindness over wealth, and in doing so, changed everything. The grand estate, like all that surrounded it, was steeped in a deep, persistent silence. Even as the wind howled outside, rattling the panes of glass in the towering windows, inside the world was still. The quiet of the night echoed throughout the palace-like halls, a silence that seemed to seep into every corner. For a man who was supposed to be the ruler of it all, it was a silence that often felt suffocating. Duke Edmund Kavanaugh sat alone in his study, the fire crackling faintly in the hearth. His face, illuminated only by the flickering flames, was etched with the marks of a life that had been forged by difficult choices. As he sat there, his hand absently tracing the rim of a goblet filled with wine, an elixir that, for all its warmth, failed to soothe the tension in his chest. His mind wandered, inevitably, to his mother. She had been the pillar of his upbringing, the quiet force behind the power he now wielded. Edmund had always admired her, but it wasn't until he had taken up the mantle of leadership that he truly understood the full extent of her influence. As a boy, he had watched her from afar, as a distant figure of elegance and grace, the epitome of control and dignity. But now, as a ruler, he saw something more, a quiet strength, a kind of power that didn't need to be shouted from the rooftops or flaunted in front of the court. It was kindness. The kind of kindness that, to the untrained eye, seemed almost insignificant. The kind of kindness that asked for nothing in return, that didn't demand attention or accolades. His mother's generosity, so carefully hidden beneath the cold exterior of wealth and status, had always been a part of her, though he had only truly understood it in the years after her passing. But now, as he sat alone in his study, the weight of his responsibility pressing on his shoulders, he found himself wondering if he could ever be like her. Could he, the Duke, the ruler of all he surveyed, be as kind, as selfless as she had been? Or was he too far removed from that world, too entrenched in the harsh realities of leadership to allow such a vulnerability to enter his life? The dilemma gnawed at him. Edmund had inherited his mother's legacy, yes, but that legacy was built on more than just wealth and power. It was built on strength, discipline, and an unyielding will. His mother had never been weak, but her strength had been of a different kind, a kind that didn't rely on brute force or fear. She had commanded loyalty and respect through her compassion, through the quiet ways she had cared for those beneath her station, for those who were too often overlooked. But that wasn't the world Edmund had inherited. The world he occupied was a world where power was gained through force, through manipulation, through the careful orchestration of political moves that placed his family's name above all others. Kindness was not a weapon in this world. Vulnerability was a risk. He had learned this lesson well. It was a lesson taught to him by his father, and one he had adopted fully. Power, Edmund had been told, was the currency of life. If you could control those around you, if you could demand respect through fear and influence, you could accomplish anything. In this world, to show any weakness, to show kindness, to show vulnerability, was to invite destruction. And yet, in the quiet solitude of his study, as the flames danced before him, he found himself reflecting on his mother's kindness with a feeling he could not quite shake. Was he wrong? Could a man who ruled with power and influence, who commanded armies and controlled vast swathes of land, ever be as vulnerable as his mother had been? Could he ever wield the power of kindness and still maintain control? Was it possible to lead with compassion without sacrificing everything? These were the questions that tore at him. And they were questions he could not answer, not yet. The moment of reckoning came unexpectedly. It was a matter of court business, a simple diplomatic negotiation that was supposed to be just another day in the life of the Duke. His advisors had been working on a treaty with a neighboring lord, a lord who had once been a loyal ally but had recently begun to waver. Rumors of discontent had been circulating, and the Duke had been called upon to address the matter before it escalated further. The meeting was tense, the air thick with the weight of unspoken threats and veiled barbs. Edmund sat at the head of the long table, surrounded by his council, his sharp eyes scanning the room as he listened to the exchange. His words were calculated, every syllable deliberate, as he laid out the terms of the treaty in the coldest, most efficient manner possible. But then, something unexpected happened. As the conversation continued, one of his attendants, a lowly servant who had been tasked with serving refreshments, was caught in a moment of misunderstanding. The servant, trembling with nerves, had failed to pour the wine properly for one of the noblemen. The man, an influential figure in the kingdom, took offense. His voice rose, sharp and biting, accusing the servant of incompetence. The room fell silent, all eyes on the young servant who stood there, red-faced and embarrassed. Edmund's advisors waited for him to act. They expected him to reprimand the servant, to remind him of his place in the grand hierarchy of the court. After all, the servant had made a mistake that could not go unpunished. But as the silence stretched on, Edmund found himself watching the young man, his heart tightening with an unexpected surge of empathy. The servant, who had once been so full of fear, now stood frozen, his eyes wide with terror. Edmund saw himself in the young man, saw the vulnerability, the terror of failure, the overwhelming weight of being in the presence of power. He saw it because it was a feeling he had known all too well, a feeling he had buried beneath the layers of his title and his strength. At that moment, Edmund was faced with a choice. He could continue down the path of ruthless power, humiliating the servant and reinforcing the divide between the nobility and the common folk. Or he could make a different choice, one that echoed the compassion his mother had shown him, one that would demand nothing in return but would change everything nonetheless. Without a word, Edmund stood from the table and motioned for the servant to come forward. The room fell silent, all eyes now on him. Edmund's voice was calm, steady, as he addressed the servant. "This man made a mistake, but mistakes do not deserve punishment. We are all human and we all err." Shock in the room was palpable. The noblemen, his advisors, even the servants, looked on in disbelief. What was the Duke doing? This was not how things were done, but Edmund did not waver. Turned to the servant, his gaze softening. "Go," he said gently, "and let this be a lesson in humility for all of us." Servant bowed deeply, his face flushed with both relief and gratitude. Edmund returned to his seat, his thoughts racing. The weight of what had just transpired pressed on him. Had he done the right thing? Was this a sign of weakness? Or was this a moment of true strength, the kind his mother had known? The room settled back into uneasy silence, but Edmund found himself lost in thought. The moment was fleeting, but it had left an indelible mark on him. The servant would go on with his life, and the treaty would be signed, but the act of kindness Edmund had extended lingered in his mind. Could this be the way forward? Could he, a ruler of men, command loyalty and respect not just through power, but through compassion? Could he lead as his mother had, softly, with strength, and with a heart that saw the humanity in every person, no matter their station? As Edmund sat in the stillness of his study, the weight of leadership pressing heavily upon him, he realized something profound. Power could come from fear, from control, from manipulation, but it could also come from kindness, from a strength that was not just measured by force, but by the ability to uplift others. His mother had understood this, and now he understood it too. The conflict within him was not over. There would be more challenges, more decisions, and more moments that would test his resolve. But Edmund now knew that he didn't have to choose between power and compassion. He could have both, if he chose to wield them together. And as he gazed out of the window, his mind made up. He realized that the true strength of a ruler was not in how much they controlled, but in how deeply they cared for the people they ruled. The night had long fallen, and the great halls of the estate were now shrouded in shadows. The flickering flames in the hearth cast a warm, golden glow across the room, but even the fire could not dispel the deep thoughts that lingered in the hearts of those who called this place home. For it was not the cold outside or the flickering of flames that captured their attention. It was the undeniable power of kindness, the invisible force that had altered the very course of their lives. It is often said that the true measure of a person lies not in the material wealth they accumulate, nor in the power they wield, but in the legacy they leave behind. History is full of those whose names are spoken with reverence: kings, queens, warriors, and statesmen, figures whose achievements have echoed through time. But how many of them are remembered for the kindness they showed, the compassion they extended, and the love they shared with others? In the grand scheme of life, it is often not the walls of wealth or the strength of armies that endure, but the small, quiet moments of humanity that transcend the boundaries of time. In the case of the Duke's family, the story was no different. For while they were known throughout the land for their immense wealth and political power, it was not these things that defined them. It was not the gold in their vaults or the titles they held that shaped their legacy. It was something far simpler, yet infinitely more profound. It was the kindness they extended, the compassion they showed to those who had nothing, the acts that seemed small in the moment, but which would echo through generations to come. This was the legacy that had been passed down from mother to son. The Duke had inherited not just his family's wealth and land, but the silent strength of his mother's compassion. She had always known that the truest measure of a person's worth was not in the size of their fortune, but in how they treated others, the ones who had no power, no title, no influence. It was in these small moments, these acts of kindness, that the true power of a family was found. The Duke's mother had been a woman of wealth and influence, yes, but it was her kindness that had made her a leader, not her titles. And it was this kindness that had touched the heart of a stranger, lifting him from despair and giving him the strength to rebuild his life. It was this kindness that had quietly shaped her son, the Duke, who had learned to see the humanity in those beneath him, even when he was told by the world that such things were weaknesses. And so, the question arises, what does it mean to leave a legacy? What is the mark we leave on the world when we are gone? Is it in the power we wield or the wealth we accumulate? Or is it in the quiet acts of compassion, the moments where we choose to see others as more than their station, more than their circumstances, and treat them as human beings worthy of dignity and respect in a world ruled by power, wealth, and status? It can be easy to forget that kindness is the one thing that can never be taken away. These things, wealth, power, status, are fleeting. They rise and fall like the tide, and no one, no matter how mighty, is immune to the forces of time. Empires crumble, fortunes are lost, and families can fall from grace with a single misstep. But kindness, true kindness, is different. It does not vanish with time. It does not fade when the walls of wealth come crashing down. Kindness transcends all, leaving a legacy that outlives even the strongest walls of wealth and influence. The Duke, in his moments of reflection, had come to realize this truth. It had not been the power he wielded, nor the wealth that filled the coffers of his family, that made him who he was. It had been his mother's kindness, a lesson passed down through generations, that had shaped him into the man he had become. And now he stood at a crossroads. He could continue down the path of power, demanding respect through fear and control, or he could embrace the true strength that his mother had understood all along, the strength of compassion. But it wasn't just the Duke's family that was changed by kindness. The stranger, too, had been transformed in ways that no one could have predicted. That single act of kindness, the sharing of food, the moment of warmth and care, had changed the course of his life. He had been nothing more than a beggar on the streets, a man with no name, no future, and no hope. But in that fleeting moment, when the Duke's mother had shared her last bit of bread with him, he had been given more than food, he had been given dignity. He had been seen, not as a beggar, but as a human being worthy of care. And that simple act had restored something inside him, hope. Over the years, the stranger would go on to rebuild his life. He would find work, learn new skills, and eventually carve out a place for himself in the world. But it was not just his circumstances that had changed, it was the way he viewed the world. He no longer saw himself as invisible, as unworthy. He saw himself as someone who could change his own fate, and that was the true power of kindness. It had not just given him food, it had given him a future. The story of the Duke and his family, of the stranger and the kindness that had changed his life, is not just a tale of personal transformation. It is a story of how kindness shapes entire legacies. It is a reminder that, in the end, what we leave behind is not the wealth we accumulate or the power we command, but the love we share, the compassion we show, and the kindness we extend to others. The Duke's family may have ruled with an iron fist, but it was their mother's heart that had truly shaped their legacy. It was her compassion, her willingness to extend kindness even when she had nothing to gain, that had built the foundation upon which their empire stood. And it was this compassion that would continue to influence future generations. As the Duke looked back on his mother's life, he began to see that her strength was not in her wealth or her title, but in her ability to see others as human beings, to recognize their worth regardless of their station in life. It was this lesson that had shaped him, even though he had struggled to understand it at times. And it was this lesson that he would pass on to his own children, ensuring that the legacy of kindness would continue, long after the power and wealth of the Kavanaugh family had faded into history. In the end, the legacy of kindness left by the Duke's mother would outlast anything else. Power could be lost in an instant, wealth could disappear, and titles could be stripped away. But kindness, once given, could never be taken away. It lived on in the hearts of those who had been touched by it, and in the lives of those they went on to change. For the Duke, the lesson was clear. He had been given a gift, one that was more precious than any fortune or title. He had been taught that true strength lay not in control, but in compassion, not in fear, but in love. And it was this lesson that would shape the rest of his life and the future of his family. As the years passed, and as the Duke looked out over the land that had once belonged to his ancestors, he realized that the legacy of kindness would be his greatest achievement. It would be the one thing that could not be taken from him. And it would be the one thing that would remain long after everything else had faded into the past. Kindness was not just a fleeting gesture, a momentary act. It was a force that had the power to change not just individuals, but entire families, entire legacies. It was the one thing that could transcend time, wealth, and power. And it was the one thing that could outlive even the strongest walls of influence. In a world ruled by power, wealth, and status, it is easy to overlook the true treasures of life. We measure success by the amount of wealth we acquire, the titles we hold, and the influence we wield. But the true measure of a person's life is not in what they accumulate, but in what they give. And kindness is the one gift that never fades. It transcends all. It outlives the strongest walls of wealth and influence. It leaves a legacy that can never be taken away. And in the end, that legacy is the most powerful legacy of all. Kindness has the power to transform lives in ways we often don't realize. I'd love to hear from you. Has an act of kindness ever changed your life in a meaningful way? Share your story or thoughts in the comments below, and let's start a conversation. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more heartwarming stories like this. Your support means the world to us.